Everybody here. I thought a timely lesson might be to look at Jerusalem. I personally kind of interested in Jerusalem with as much as it's been in the news, so I started sort of looking into it, and I drew the conclusion maybe this is a good lesson for us. Any of us ever been to Jerusalem? Okay, so I happen to have been able to go there a couple of times, but my talk is just based upon basic information. I will tell you, when you go there, people tell you that even people that are not religious at all will go there and say, it has a weird feeling. It's got this special feeling of religiosity that's there. I think it's hard to go there and not feel like it's religiously significant. You know, you go to New York City and you feel like it's big buildings and it feels like it's, you know, center of the economy. You go to certain other cities, Los Angeles, and it's the trends that the feeling of Jerusalem is one of, wow, this feels really religious and sacred. You get that feeling right away. And of course, its long history is probably why that's so. So again, some basic facts for us to dive into, and we'll eventually get into some scriptures here. But to just warm up our thinking, we've got a picture here of Jerusalem there. And of course, the iconic thing you think of it now is that Golden Dome. And the Golden Dome is a mosque, and it's placed as near as the Muslims and everybody could tell, right on top of where the temple used to be. And the temple, starting off right away, the temple is an interesting concept because there wasn't just one temple, right? The temple was originally built by Solomon, right? So Solomon builds a temple, and then that temple gets destroyed, and then there's a replacement temple that gets built. You remember that we look at the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and they rebuild the temple. But what we often kind of skip over is that the older people, the old men who remembered the former temple, when they see the new temple that's built, they weep. They say, this isn't really a temple, right? This doesn't look at all like what we thought the temple should be. So later on, Herod decides to build a temple, and Herod does a whopping good job at it. In fact, even the Romans in their writings say he built the finest temple in the world. And he did it with a lot of slave labor, and he built a much bigger platform even. So Jerusalem is made up of two mountains, that they call them. It's not snowy peaks, but there's two mountains that Jerusalem is made of. And in the beginning, it was one mountain, and it ends up blurring over into the second mountain, and then Herod sort of helps fill it all in, and in part puts his temple there. And the wall, the retention wall, in order to support the hill he built, that's where the Jews are currently praying. The only thing left from the Romans was one of the retention walls, and that's where they're praying. So it's not a wall of the temple. It's not a wall of the courtyard of the temple. It's not a wall of the marketplace outside the temple. It's the retaining wall of the hill that had to even be re-excavated. Now, recently in the 1990s, they excavated the other side of the retaining wall. So now both sides have been excavated. Very interesting finds when they got there. Some of what they found is that the temple had been so totally destroyed, they took apart every block of the temple, and they drug these huge blocks off the edge with Jewish slave labor from having recently conquered them. They drug it off the side, and they just threw these blocks over. And so there's all these mismatched blocks and columns from the temple that they've been able to go through that debris, and they found amazing archaeological finds when they scraped the hillside bare. Sticking with the Romans for a while, you know, after they destroyed the temple, yes,
What did you say destroyed the temple that Herod built?
Herod's temple was destroyed by the Romans.
Okay.
And the Romans destroy it. And there's interesting, see, the Romans, among other things, were very good historians, right? We have a lot of information about the destruction of the temple that happens with the Romans, including the fact that it got set on fire, and they tried to put the fire out a couple times about whether the fire was a good idea or not a good idea, and the fires got raging. And for a while, they devoted themselves to firefighting, and then they said, no, you know what, let's burn this whole place down. And then they go, wait, on second thought, let's not. And part of what was happening is that the silver in particular has a lower melting point. Howard probably knows more about this than I do. But the silver was forming puddles of silver and was running out from the temple, catching other things on fire. So once the fire's out and it cools down, guess what happened? Everybody went on a silver and gold excavation, right? And so they start chipping it off and shaving it off. And when you come to the big blocks, what do you have to do? Move the big blocks. So in typical Roman form, they said, you, get that lever, move that block, now. So as you move the block, the Roman soldiers scrape off the gold, and then they're like, hey, we've been ordered to clear this hill. So it added And what did Christ say? Christ had said, not one block will be left standing on top of another. The Jerusalem's significance in world history, I believe, and many scholars would agree, it is hard to overstate the significance of Jerusalem in world history. There is no other city that comes even close to it. Many other major cities like Rome and Egypt with Alexandria and other places have long since fallen into relative obscurity. Babylon is now a desert, right? So all of these great cities, the wonders of the world, right? The Hanging Gardens of Babylon is now a sand dune. But Jerusalem resiliently and stubbornly continues to remain of such significant focus. It is arguably, it has shaped our history more than any other geographic location on earth. Wow, Bob, that's a bold claim. Well, has anybody ever heard of something called the Crusades? Where were they going to? Jerusalem. They were going to reconquer Jerusalem. So they're taking on Muslim leaders at the time, fighting them with all of the powers of Europe they can marshal to go down, and if nothing else, kept them at relative check and bay. If that hadn't happened, the world might be a very different place. So Jerusalem continues to go through these pendulum swings. But some basic facts we can talk about with Jerusalem. It's one of the oldest and most important cities in the world. It's remarkably resilient. It comes back again and again and again from situations other cities wouldn't have come back from. Is it the most important city in the world? Pretty much safe to say even today, right? What's in the news today? Does it matter about Jerusalem? It's the only city venerated by all three of the world religions. Quick, where's Mecca? And have you ever been there? And do you want to be there? But yet, everybody wants to go to Jerusalem and all three world religions. It's significant, right? How many of us would like to go to Jerusalem? I want to go to Jerusalem. It's significant to me. But that's not true of other cities in the world. It's the only city mentioned in the Bible, both as to this earth and then in the new world after the Judgment Day. Only Jerusalem is mentioned. Kind of interesting. Very unique legal status today. Does anybody know the exact legal status of Jerusalem today? It's complicated. You probably don't. It's probably more than you want to know. But suffice it to say, there's some interesting things about the legal status that you might say, I didn't know that. 1948 is when the modern-day Middle East takes a lot of shape after World War II. Britain had held it as part of the British Empire. And the British Empire was now under a lot of the control of the United States and Russia. A lot of history there, but we'll just say the world going forward, we divided up. England started dividing it up after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and after World War II, we finished it off. Winston Churchill, in one of his diaries, says he heard an announcement about the recreation of Israel that FDR and others had announced, and he said it would have been nice if they'd at least let me know. So, they started putting places like modern-day Jordan and Kuwait and Iraq and Iran have no relevancy whatsoever to former borders of anything like a country. It was literally a bunch of guys with a map, like if all of us were given the project today, and we go, all right, what do you say? How about here? Well, there's a river there. Let's go to the river. All right, wait a minute. This side wants the river. All right, we'll use the mountain range. That's how literally arbitrary it is. So when you hear people talking about things, even with the Palestinians and that, understand all of these boundaries were firmed up after World War II. And in 1948, the thought of the world at that time, was that Jerusalem was going to be under the control of the United Nations, and it was going to be a separate neutral area. That's what we said afterwards. So that was what was going to happen in 1948. Now there's some wars that occur right after the establishment of Israel, right? There's several wars that occur there. And as part of the wars that go back and forth, Jordan ended up with half of Jerusalem. In 1967, a few years later, Israel says, let's get this straightened out. And in the Six-Day War, Israel kicks Jordan out of Jerusalem and says, ours. To this day, the world, including even the United States, has not really recognized that. It's in a state of purgatory, for a religious term, that Israel says it's ours and you're not taking it away from us. But half of the city of Jerusalem, technically, and by the way, most of the governments agree, it's actually Jordan. So Jordan gets kind of irritated and says it's theirs, and everybody goes, Jordan, you're just a pencil drawing from after World War II, so shut up. But understand that Israel itself, so when Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognized it as the capital of Israel, that is a very big deal. because it has been up in the air since World War II, and even, very likely in other administrations would be said, by the way, we're going to clear this up. It is not yours. And we're going to even try to get the UN to come in with blue helmets and take over. So it was a very big deal to say, we are recognizing that as the capital of Israel. And of course, the Muslim population and others don't like that. They're upset about that. So just a little bit of history about it. It's mentioned in the Old and in the New Testament as specifically causing God grief. Being upset about what Jerusalem is doing caused God a lot of irritation in the Old Testament and the New Testament, right? We all know famously when Jesus sees it, he weeps for Jerusalem. He doesn't weep for the land of Galilee. He doesn't weep for the country of Israel. He doesn't weep for the 12 tribes or the tribe in exile. He specifically weeps about Jerusalem. This city is really important to me and God. And I'm crying about the state of Jerusalem. That's interesting, right? It'd be like if somebody telling the history later of the United States would say, and George Washington or some significant American figure said, Chicago, I weep for you. You go, hey, what about the rest of us? Why Chicago? Because they really thought that's a significant, well, Jerusalem was such a city. And it defies historical trends and logic. If there's nothing else you want to have faith affirming, Israel itself defies what all the conventional scholars would tell you should happen to cities when they come and go. None of it makes sense. Which, by the way, there's other things like things on our chart are elements that don't make sense, like water. Water shouldn't be what water is. Really good that it is. It's the same thing for people who want to say, look, I don't want to have to put my intellect in the closet to be a Christian. You do not have to put your intellect in the closet to be a Christian as to Jerusalem, because it should not exist. It should have been done away with so many times and was sort of done away with. For it to still be there, it doesn't make any sense that it is especially as important as it is. Okay, so let's look at a little bit in history. It's about 5,024 years old. Okay, that's about as old as it is. 5,000 years ago, the archaeologists tell us what was going on in Jerusalem. One of the two mountains, and at that time we know the Sphinx is being built in Egypt. There's lots of things going on in China and other places. But at that time it was a wooden village. It had a few wooden buildings and a few wooden houses is what was going on in Jerusalem. Is it the oldest city mentioned in the Bible? No, not even close. What city in the vicinity is older? Anybody know? I mean, I have to look these things up so I don't blame you for not knowing. What is it?
Is it Philadelphia?
Philadelphia is a Greek city and important, but older city, maybe if you went back into the archaeological digs of when people were there, but a city that still has the name today that's older in the Bible. And it's right by there, by the way. Jericho. Jericho's at least 11,000 years old and was called basically Jericho, right? It's basically the same place. So it's twice as old as Jerusalem. So again, if you're going to look for a significant walled city in the vicinity that you want to make, well, use Jericho. Don't use Jerusalem. Okay? Jerusalem has, no scholar will deny, Jerusalem has been utterly destroyed at least twice. Right? We have that in the Bible ourselves. But I mean, it's been destroyed. And then it's like, well, you only invest time, effort, and money to rebuild something that's worth rebuilding, right? If we took over Jackson and we tore down some really crappy building as part of the battle, we're not going to rebuild that building, right? So same thing. If you're a king, you're not going to rebuild the city unless it's in the right place at the right time. You're going to put the effort into it. Okay? It's been besieged 23 times in history, surrounded to have the people. And the things that have gone on during the besiegement are unbelievable. The accounts the Romans and others have, unbelievable to most of us. Mothers roasting their child over a fire while people in the neighborhood are fighting over the same child. And the mother says, since it's mine, I at least get first dibs. That's happened in Jerusalem. Captured and recaptured 44 times in world history. Attacked 52 times. In 1538, the walls as we see them was rebuilt by Suleiman the Magnificent, is his name. I don't like to give him that title, but that's how people know him in history. But he's the one who rebuilt the walls in 1538. So those walls are virtually brand new by world standards compared to other walls, right? Okay, so what's in the name? What does Jerusalem mean? And who named it? Well, that's its own controversy, actually. And it's one of the mysteries of this place. Because most people agree that the Salem, ever heard the name Salem? That's part of the root word of Jerusalem. And Salem is likely a Canaanite word for the evening god, the god of the first star. They called Salem. And probably Jerusalem is some variation of founded by Salem, the god of the evening star, founded the city. However, there's Hebrew sayings, and the place of abiding together with place of peace can kind of sound like Jerusalem if you run the two together. So some of the Jewish people want to say, no, it was named by Abraham as the place of abiding. Historically, it may have been named by the Canaanites, because we know later on in the Bible is beyond dispute it's Canaanite. So hard to say, but the actual name of Jerusalem itself might be more of a variation of a Canaanite name than it would be a biblical name that, that God literally handed down the name. The origin of the name isn't so significant as just, it is what it is. Who gave it the name, as we said, it's hard to say. Nobody really knows. What other names does it have? There's another name that the Canaanites like to call it, probably a part of the city. The city ends up growing, and we'll talk about that a bit. The city ends up growing, and as it grew, there was a certain region of the city that had a name that we often use to refer to that region and then regions beyond. Do you know what that name is? Zion. Zion is a Canaanite name for part of the city of Jerusalem. So when we sing, Zion, Zion, along thy gates to see, you're singing about Jerusalem. And we're probably singing about the New Jerusalem that's going to be after God has had his judgment day, the New Jerusalem. We long to see the gates of the new Zion, using a Canaanite name from before David conquered it. So interesting, right? I didn't know. I'm actually saying, hey, I want to, there's other parts of the world where you have St. Petersburg and places that have changed names. We're actually going back to the name of the Canaanite region of the town when we say Zion. I didn't know that. And it's first called Jerusalem in the biblical account by Joshua. That's the first place that we see it being called Jerusalem. We'll see some of the other names here when we get to the scriptures. So in the beginning, it's not the oldest city in the Bible, right? We know that Jericho's a lot older than that. And then Enoch, the city of Enoch in Canaan is maybe the oldest city. It was actually the Canaanite capital, Enoch or Eunuch, however they said it. And then Jerusalem was certainly much older than, Jericho. Jericho and Enoch were certainly much older than Jerusalem. The first non-biblical mention we could find in history of it being called this, that we have outside of Bible sources, is the cuneiforms from 1400 BC. And actually at that time it is calling it Ursulum, and that would be the Canaanite term for founded by the evening star god. But we find that we have those cuneiforms. Jerusalem was its own territory and was part of Canaan. It was its own sort of little fiefdom. It had its own leaders. It was its own thing. So in the old days, not even that long ago, many of us know that Germany wasn't a unified country in Germany. It was a bunch of castles and these warlords really up to close to the turn of the 1900s, right? We end up getting Kaiser Wilhelm and others who tried to pull it together and make it one functioning country. Of course, that happened earlier in Italian history. Those different cities, Venice and other cities in Italy, were really their own kingdoms with their own currency and other things. Later on, they tried to make it one thing. Well, likewise, in Canaan, Jerusalem was its own thing. There's Jericho, not that far up the road. In today's terms, as far as driving away, when you go there, you take a tour bus and you leave, you get on the highway, and they go, oh, by the way, that's Jericho over there on that hill. Not that far away, maybe as far away as, certainly between here and Lansing is the way it struck me. We can look it up, but it's up the road. So Jerusalem was its own walled city, as we see. Names perhaps not biblical. Canaanites gave it the other name of Zion. It's not even the first Canaanite city, as we've said. And so then why in the world is it so important, right? If you're going back in history, you're like, hey, Jericho's been around a lot longer. It's twice as old. Maybe has a better, you could argue Jericho's a better place to build your stronghold. It's got a lot of plains around it. You'd see an advancing army easier. It's not as high. It kind of makes more sense. Jericho makes sense. Of course, it's the first place God helps the Israelites conquer, because Jericho's a pretty important place. So you'd think biblically God could have said, hey, Jericho, we're going to conquer it. We're going to go back there. We're going to inhabit that place. But to this day, it's very insignificant. So what advantages does Jerusalem have as a city? Okay, there must be something going for it if it's continued to be resiliently surviving as a city. So what are all the advantages Jerusalem has over other cities?
It's where Christ was born.
Okay, where Christ was born in Bethlehem, just outside Jerusalem, but yet in that vicinity. So Christ, the Jews believed that one of the mounts was the first place where Isaac was going to be offered by Abraham. That's why it's called the abiding place, is that it was where God was specifically kind to Abraham when he was going to offer Isaac, as one of the two mountains, if you will, that they made it out of. But other than that, if we were playing, you guys ever heard of SimCity? It was a software program where you build up a fake city and then you have to, civil engineers started it in class and then it morphed over into being a game you play. If you got SimCity and you've been given Jerusalem and somebody else has been given, St. Petersburg, or they've been given Miami, are you happy in terms of playing a game with just the resources that you have? No. Because there's a real problem with Jerusalem. One of the real problems is it has very little water, and water is really important. So there's very little water, and it's up about, well, we'll see. How proximate was this location to major trade routes? So Jerusalem's not got much going for it. In fact, you could say it has really kind of nothing going for it. It's way up in the hills with no water. And especially back in that day and age when you didn't have wells and well pumps, it's really a pain in the neck. And so they end up coming up with a way to get some water, not real convenient. If you're going to have to rebuild after there's been a total destruction of some place, what do you guys say we go up the road to Jericho? It seems like it's a lot better place than this place is. But yet, Jerusalem continues to thrive. Is it close to major trade routes? That must be it. It must be the oasis around Chicago of the area, right? You get off, you get a Coney dog, you use the restrooms. That must be it. No, it's not close to the trade routes at all. In fact, a lot of people who got super irritated about the location of Jerusalem were people like Pontius Pilate. He's like, what in the heck? I got to go there? Because he's in Caesarea Philippi. He's along the coast. He's got a beautiful place. The ocean breezes are lovely. He's got to trek inland 30 miles to get to Jerusalem because these Jews are going to have this festival, and I got to make sure they don't get out of control. The whole time Pilate is in Jerusalem, the accounts we have, he's in a bad mood. It's a smelly place. There's a bunch of animals, and they're killing them, and it smells terrible. So even the Jewish worship has the burning of incense and other things, because it smells lousy here. There's not a lot of water. It's high up. It's hot. And there's no easy way to come and go from here. But that's the basics of Jerusalem. So a big question to scholars in the 1800s, if you were at Harvard and Yale and Oxford University and you were going to have a scholarly conference, a really good conversation for you would be, did King David ever really live? And by the way, I mentioned some of you modern day Jews in places like Detroit, Michigan, if you ask them, they go, I don't know. Because once you start to get to King David, you got to work backwards as to how did David get to be David? And if the Bible's right about that, were they really in slavery in Egypt? And then a lot of other things, it's kind of hard to. So the best way, if you're an agnostic-y type person, is to go, I don't want to tackle that tough problem with David. Because if David exists, then this gets really interesting again about this place that becomes this miraculous capital in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so there's how the walls look today. Those are the 1500 era walls, mostly that you're seeing. Yes, sir?
Before you get out the importance of Jerusalem, I was thinking a strange story in the Old Testament is Melchizedek, who Abraham meets. He's from Salem, which some people say that's Jerusalem. So there's a lot going on with Jerusalem, as you're saying, even as far back as Abraham was.
Very good. Melchizedek and Salem, hold that thought.
Yep, right.
All right, so the city walls, just interesting facts. There's 2,500 miles of city walls in Jerusalem. They're about 36 feet high on average. And by the way, the funny thing I even thought when I would teach the youth worship is that, when Ezra and Nehemiah come back to rebuild, they come up with this ingenious plan, and they said, okay, Jack, I'll tell you what, you build the wall around your property, and then Howard's going to build the wall around his property. Would you want the wall around your property to be a little bit lower, a little easier to get to? No, I'm gonna try to outbuild. So nobody wants to have the wimpy little wall right by their property. Ingenious plan, right? So they all decided about 36 feet seems high enough. Nobody wants to be 28 because everybody goes, okay, when we get those ladders, you're going up over there. No, I'm gonna keep it the same. So 36 feet, about 8 feet thick on average. There's 34 watchtowers. Now when you go to other famous cities, if you go on a tour like I just happened to be with the college, and you go to places like Lisbon and other places, they will brag they've still got 2 of the original watchtowers that are there. We had as many as 12 at one time. It has 34 watchtowers. Of course, many of them rebuilt along the way. But there's 34 watchtowers in the walls. 7 main gates. You hear these gates being mentioned in the Bible, and you go, how many there's so many gates? There's 7 main gates. There's 2 minor gates. And there's 4 big dates. If you're going to be an aficionado of Jerusalem, the 4 biggies you got to know. David captures it at about 1000 BC. Babylon captures it at about 586 BC. And then the Romans come twice. They come in 63 BC, and then we know, the time of Jesus, the Romans are there. And then in 67 AD, they start the campaign, and it culminates around 70. They come back for real, and they're really mad that time. So, and why are they mad? Because there's been this false Messiah that's told the people to rise up against Israel, and they've killed a bunch of Roman soldiers, and they've tried to take over the Romans, and the Romans said that just isn't going to do. And by the way, the Romans are like, what's with these people? They're in a relatively insignificant place. We shouldn't have to worry about them. We'd have left them alone, because they're not on the major trade routes. They're in the middle of nowhere. They have this crazy religion. Why in the world did the Romans even let the Israelites continue to practice, the Hebrews continue to practice their religion? Well, probably the same reason the Persians allowed them to continue practicing their religion, and other people before them had let them continue to practice their religion. Because first of all, they're so determined they'll kill themselves, they'll die before they'll stop worshiping, and they really seem to believe that. But another main reason that wasn't too hard to convince these other leaders, they're really, really good at paying taxes. They are used to paying taxes. They give 10% of everything. I mean, there are people, Garth, conqueror of Jerusalem, don't worry. These people take their garden, and they take 10% of everything in their garden. They will be wonderful to tax. So the foreign leaders go, okay, that sounds good. And by the way, the other convenient thing for you, all of the taxes of that regard are held in this one big, beautiful temple. If you ever get really mad, they're right there. It's kind of a thing with them. They got to put it there. We'll just take the temple, which happens. It's an amazingly attractive target. And that's why all those times it's been besieged and attacked. Because people come in, when there's not a time of war, they go to the temple and they come back and say, Garth, you want to see this place? They got rooms full of gold and silver. And Garth goes, well, I was trying to balance my budget. Hey guys, let's go take them. So that's one of the things. They were very good at paying their taxes because they're used to paying taxes. All right, how many times is Jerusalem mentioned in the Bible? What do you think? 811 times. 660 in the Old Testament, 151 in the New Testament. That's a lot of times. That's a lot of reference for a 1,200-page book. You can do the, you know how we have statistics on everything now. It's funny to listen to baseball games even now. You listen to, I'm listening to them more than I'm watching them. Well, this guy came up from the minors. He's hitting .283, except against left-handers. He's hitting .363. He doesn't like the slider. And boy, don't ever throw him. Holy cow, we got stats on everything. Well, you can almost come up to a 1,200-page Bible. You got 811. I mean, it's coming out pretty high in terms of pages of the Bible reference on average, right? So it's pretty amazing. So what names has it had? I don't have them here because it was too much time. I didn't have time to put in my lesson. It has had a bunch of names over time. The place of peace, the place of God, the place of reverence, the sacred place, other even areas, the writings. It's had a lot of different monikers, but basically bunches of names that are all holy in the name. The place of peace, the place of the abiding God, the place of the living God, the sacred place, the great sacred place, the magnificent sacred place. So it's always had this religiosity running through its names. Nobody calls it, the city of peaches. It's always had religiosity running through it as its main thing. Okay, so let's look at the Bible, and let's see some of what we can find out. If somebody wants to take Genesis 14:18. Maybe Ozzy, we'll have you take Genesis 14:18, please.
Then Mechel, I'm not sure, Mechel-Sidus, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High.
All right, so Melchizedek, I think, is how we, and by the way, I listened to a book about Jerusalem with a scholar, and I would just say we should all cringe at the way we pronounce these names if he's right, because I'm like, oh, I think that's what we say as Melchizedek, but it's going to be Melchizedek or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, we call that Melchizedek. So we do brutally to those names, but Melchizedek. And then, of course, as Howard pointed out, king of Salem, which they do believe, I mean, scholars say that's probably the ancient name for what later becomes Jerusalem. That region, at least, very close to me, it's a king of an area. Probably didn't just mean that one hill, but it meant that area. Dad?
Seems to be, never have been there, but listening to you, a lot of places they built temples or like structures over sacred, let's call them sacred places. Who gave permission for different people to build, allegedly enclose a site?
Yeah, so my dad's saying that there's sacred sites that are closed off to other people. That is hotly a subject of fierce debate, and literally people say you start being too aggressive on that and you could start World War III, right? Because why is the Dome of the Rock allowed to be on top of what used to be the Jewish temple? Well, there's been a lot of time in history where it's gone back and forth with leadership, and we all know that God's time is not like our time. But you have things like for 500 years these people occupied the land, and then 200 years. That's a long time. And so the Muslims occupied this area for a very long time. Unfortunately or fortunately or just reality, they occupied the space for a long time. And their practice is to put their place of worship on top of yours. They're dominating you. George W. Bush, one of the worst things he did, in my opinion, is after 9/11 saying to the world that the Muslim faith is a faith of peace and tolerance. First of all, any good Muslim was grievously offended by him saying that. It is a warlord religion that is meant to be a dominating force, and it will dominate the world. A devout Muslim believes they will ultimately control the world, and they will prevail. It's not a religion of just getting along and going along with other people. So putting their religious sites on top of another site and holding it is part of what they kind of believe they're doing. They're showing that their religion trumps the other religion. So that's part of what maybe you're referring to. But there's a lot of Christian temples and other things that have been built too. And a lot of it goes back in history. There's allegedly the church that's there supposedly was Constantine's mother built one of the first purpose-built churches in Jerusalem. They claim that's the case. It certainly seems to be that era. And that was Constantine's mother went there with a group of people and built a church. It's still there, by the way, supposedly. So you have a lot of religious sites that are there. The Christians wanting it, the Crusades, as we mentioned, the Crusades occurred. The Crusades was a pretty major undertaking, and you're getting all these foreign governments that don't even like each other to go together for one cause and fight. Pretty historic event that occurred, right? That they went down there and had some success, not successes, but they fight over Jerusalem. They're fighting over this city. You think the people in Europe could have said, who cares? I'm never going to be there. It's not bothering me. It's not like it's a World Trade Center. It's not like somehow we're all not going to be able to get gold or oil or something. But people cared because of their religiosity at that particular site. Okay, so we first see potential mention of Melchizedek. Melchizedek is its own study. I'll let Howard teach that lesson, because who exactly is Melchizedek and where does he come from? The general belief is that it goes back in time to being relatives of Abraham, their kin, if you will. And maybe it's where Abraham learned some of the devoutness that Abraham learned. That's my understanding, but again, somebody could do their own lesson on this. So he comes out, he's got bread and wine, and he blesses Abraham at that place, right? Okay, that's one verse. Let's look at Psalms 76, verses 2 and 4. Return of the bell. Somebody got Psalm 76, 2 and 4, Garth, do you have that?
His tent is in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. There he broke the flashing arrows, the shields and the swords, the weapons of war. You are resplendent and with light, more majestic than mountains, rich with game.
Okay, so again, two names, that Salem and then Zion, and showing that they're you know, both being referenced there. Two names for what we call Jerusalem today. Okay? Judges 19, verses 10 and 11. Chuck, you have that maybe? Okay, Judges 19, 10 and 11. And then we'll let somebody else be looking ahead to the next one. What about, Dad, you want to try to find 2 Samuel 5:5? It's one ahead of where we are now. 2 Samuel 5:5.
Judges 19, 10 and 11. But unwilling to stay another night, the man left and went towards Jebus, that is Jerusalem, with his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine. When they were near Jebus, and the day was almost gone, the servant said to his master, "Come, let's stop at the city of Jebusite and spend the night."
Okay, the reason I put that verse in there is that this land had been occupied by the Jebusites. And another name for Jerusalem is Jebus. There's some scholarly debate about that, but that verse even says Jebus, which is Jerusalem. So it seems to clear that up in a biblical way, whereas other scholars say, well, maybe it was another city nearby. But this was the land of the Jebusites. And that's another reason why Jerusalem may be part of what it was, Salem and the Jebusites, Salem, and then over time, thousands of years, it became Jerusalem as one of the other thoughts about it. But that Jebus is another name for Jerusalem. Okay, 2 Samuel 5:5. Dad, do you have that?
In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years.
Okay, so it mentions 2 different places David ruled. He ruled first in Hebron, and then he rules in Jerusalem. David determines Jerusalem to be the capital city. We're going to read that if we have time. We're running out of time today, so we can stop here pretty soon. But we're going to read about the account of David and when he comes to Jerusalem, and we'll talk about a little bit of the intrigue about what goes on there. So maybe this is a good place for us to stop because we've had our bell. And so stopping point, is this all interesting to you? I mean, we can have another lesson. We could do another lesson on this. I originally thought it was a self-contained, maybe one lesson. As you see, it's mentioned 811 times in the Bible. So we're not doing a galley reading of all of the places it's mentioned. We're just trying to get a flavor and a feel for this place. That why is it so significant? Because it seems like we should know that, right? Knowing our Bible a little bit, we should have an understanding of it. Does that make sense, everybody? Good? Yeah. Okay, then let's talk about our prayer list and the additions to it.